Hello, everyone, and welcome to a deeper look into crime. Imagine the heavy sound of a steel door sliding shut, right? That echo just bouncing off cold concrete walls. In that fraction of a second, the world you knew completely disappears. You aren't an individual navigating society anymore. You're now a subject of the criminal justice system. Today, we're going to explore the architecture of confinement, breaking down the stark and honestly often misunderstood differences between two completely distinct worlds of incarceration.
The words jail and prison are frequently tossed around in casual conversation as if they're basically the exact same thing. But to a criminologist, and, well, more importantly, to the human beings actually living inside them, they represent two entirely different psychological realities. So, what happens to the human mind in the exact moment freedom is permanently stripped away? It's a pretty disturbing thought, isn't it? When the state takes physical control of a human body, it triggers this highly categorized, deeply psychological process of containment. But to really understand this process, we have to look at exactly where it all begins. Part 1. The Gateway of Confinement. Jail is essentially a short-term detention facility. It's primarily used for pretrial processing or minor offenses. Think of it as society's immediate reaction to a perceived threat, a place where chaos and uncertainty really reign supreme. When someone is arrested, they don't just immediately go to prison. They go here. Jail is the holding zone. It's this tense, volatile kind of purgatory where individuals just wait. They might be waiting to see a judge, waiting to post bail, or serving out a really brief sentence for a minor infraction, usually lasting anywhere from a few hours to a few months. The atmosphere there is incredibly thick with anxiety, mostly because the final outcome is entirely unknown. Part 2. The Permanence of Prison. Now, contrast that with prison. Prison is a long-term incarceration institution designed exclusively for convicted felons. Once a trial concludes and a severe verdict is actually handed down, all that uncertainty of jail evaporates, and it's replaced by a heavy, inescapable reality. Prison isn't for waiting. It is the final, permanent destination for serious offenders. The psychological weight of this transition, moving from a temporary holding cell into a monolithic prison block, is absolutely profound. Part 3. Control, Administration, and Time. The actual progression of confinement is incredibly stark when you map it out. It starts with an arrest and pretrial detention, which might literally only last a few hours. Then that can stretch into minor sentences in jail, taking up maybe months of a person's life. But once you cross that threshold into felony sentences in prison, the timeline shifts entirely to years. You're guaranteed at least 1 year, and that can go all the way up to the maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Just imagine the human mind trying to process that shift, from counting hours in a local holding cell to counting decades behind a heavily fortified perimeter. And as the timeline expands, so does the absolute power of the authority controlling you. Jails are operated locally, usually by county sheriffs or city police departments, so it's a localized, immediate form of control. But prisons are operated by state or federal departments of corrections. At that point, you're no longer dealing with a local municipality. You've been fully absorbed by a massive, unyielding bureaucracy with vast resources dedicated entirely to keeping you contained. This massive bureaucratic escalation is tied directly to the severity of the human behavior involved. Jails mostly house those accused of misdemeanors and minor crimes, but prisons are strictly reserved for felonies. We're talking homicide, robbery, and serious drug crimes. The entire environment inside a prison is fundamentally shaped by the fact that every single person living there has been convicted of a serious, often violent violation of the social contract. Part 4. Surviving the Daily Routine. The daily psychological pressure in these places is largely dictated by who's sleeping in the cell right next to you. In jail, the overall security might be lower, but it features a highly unstable population mix. You could literally have an individual who just got a DUI sitting next to someone arrested for a violent assault, all processing their immediate trauma together in the same room. Prison, on the other hand, is clinically categorized. Inmates are scientifically sorted from minimum all the way up to supermax security levels based on their threat level, creating these heavily monitored, completely segregated tiers of existence. Because of the high turnover and constant instability in jails, there's really no time to establish real programs. You're just being held. So you see minimal rehabilitation services locally. But in prison, because of the sheer permanence of the stay, the state enforces a heavily structured, unyielding daily routine. To manage a captive population long-term, prisons actually offer access to education and formal training programs. So in a way, the transience of jail essentially prevents true rehabilitation, while the permanence of prison forces a tightly controlled existence designed from the ground up by the state. Part 5. The Psychology of Punishment.
So, why has society engineered these two entirely distinct systems? Well, criminologists point out that they reflect our core theories of human behavior. Jails function purely as a mechanism of immediate social control. Society perceives a threat, and the jail instantly removes it from the streets. Prisons, however, are way more complex. They're designed for deliberate, long term punishment. Now, both institutions are deeply rooted in deterrence theory, the idea that the threat of these dark, isolating places will stop people from committing crimes. But prisons also represent the justice system's attempt at ultimate rehabilitation, operating on the hope that decades of structured routine will somehow cure the criminal impulse. And this brings us to a dark, unavoidable reality. When we really understand the profound difference between the chaotic limbo of jail and the permanent, crushing weight of prison, we start to see the true psychological toll of our justice system. So we have to ask, as these distinct institutions shape how society manages crime, does the system truly rehabilitate, or does it just permanently break the mind? Comment your thoughts on this explainer. Also, subscribe to us to see more explainers like this in the future. See you in the next explainer.